This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, we're now jumping into our second talk for this new series we've been putting together, and we want to encourage you to first go back and watch I should say you should make sure you have watched the curriculum launch video where we really walk through book by book, and that in combination with the guides is so helpful. And then as you think through how can I combine and simplify, and you then set out to purchase the books. So you have your books. What do you do next? So that's where we're at today for this talk. And really thinking through our annual preparation for this video, right? Not so much the day-to-day or at the end of term reflections, any of that. But we've all been thinking through the CMEC Summer Challenge, and we get this sense that an education of books and things is unique, and with all of these different streams, there is this big feast. There is a lot to prepare, but it doesn't have to be overwhelming. And the key thing to remember then is to refuse to get discouraged and overwhelmed. We remember Mrs. Brown from the summer community read, The History of a PUS Schoolroom by the mother who runs it. And she told us this was an adventure, and we're going to keep that spirit of adventure before us. And the sense that any preparation that you do will be a benefit. It doesn't have to feel like a zero-sum game. If I don't prepare at all, all that I need to do, I shouldn't begin. No, any prep will make for more success. And so often when we were starting out, I would just be so excited about the books. I'm just a can-do person, and would have this feeling that, I just want to jump right in. But now I see that the more time that I actually spend preparing, and the more complicated my life has become, that I need to know who I am and what I'm about, and that this pre-reading and preparation will be the thing that helps with that. So we can't think in terms of comparison to our friend who really just is able to read so quickly, or, this is a pass or fail, or I'm doing a good job or I'm not doing a good job. That's that fixed mindset that we want to push back against. And so many of us didn't have a Mason education and were raised to think that way. But she encouraged us to reject that line of thinking. It's not about our children or our desire for praise or place or a prize. No one's giving you any prizes. I had thought of giving prizes for the CME Summer Challenge, and everybody was like, Amy, you can't do that. Mason would not approve. No, what we're doing this is we want a rich and full life. And that every book that you look at carefully, you'll feel more confident and more knowledgeable in your role as guide, philosopher, and friend. And as we quoted in the previous article, where Mrs. Brown says, the secret of this method of attack is for the teacher and taught to work together as fellow students. The whole of our enjoyment and success depended on the fact that we did the work together as friends and fellow laborers. And so this really then becomes the approach that we take for schooling our children. So Celeste, will you talk about that more, this posture that you've taken for your school prep for homeschooling?
Yeah, first I just want to say that we do have a video on YouTube of a conversation that we had as part of Charlotte Mason Coast to Coast, where we did talk about pre-reading. And we go into some of the benefits of pre-reading and the ways in which we structure that. And so if you want more information about that, I would suggest starting there with that short video. But also, I'm just going to briefly go over kind of our approach to the summer challenge and the kind of annual work that we do here. And I'm going to start with a quote from Mason. And she says, this is in volume 3, she says, what is the teacher's part, right? What is our role? The teacher's part is, in the first place, to see what is to be done, to look over the work of the the day in advance and see what mental discipline, as well as what vital knowledge, this and that lesson afford. And then to set such questions and such tasks as shall give full scope to his pupils' mental activity. And so there is this way in which our preparation has a practical end, right? We're looking at the work of the book. We're seeing what are the topics that are going to be covered and what kinds of work will my student be doing alongside that to give full scope to his mental activity, right? What in the individual lessons, what is this chapter about? What's that chapter about? And so that kind of like just practical approach to looking at the work in advance is part of what we do in the summertime. And it does set us up well for making decisions about books, for deciding when it will fit in our day, what materials we'll need. All of those things fall in that category, and like a logistical kind of category. But then I think, and she hints at it there with this idea of vital knowledge, that there's also a philosophical end. That, you know, if we think of our role as to be guide, philosopher, and friend, then how do we structure our summer preparation to prepare for that? How do we take on that role while we prepare in the summertime? And a couple quotes to that end. She says in volume 3 as well, our part, again, the teacher's part, is to remove obstructions and to give stimulus and guidance to the child who is trying to get into touch with the universe of things and thoughts which belong to him. So I think there is a way in which, if we are thinking of it only in a practical way, we can miss the idea that it's the child that's trying to get in touch with the universe of things and thoughts, right? And we just want to see what can we put in place to get out of the way of that child doing that work. And so we don't want to think of ourselves as doing the work for the child. It gives us a nice posture of thinking about how do we guide them? How do we be their friend through their work of the course of the school year? Another thing she says, the teacher's part is to see and feel for himself, and then to rouse his pupils by an appreciative look or word. And we'll talk about this in a minute, but I think that the thought that we want to approach the books with the posture of a student and to feel for ourselves and appreciate the book on their own merits for ourselves as the reader goes such a long way in terms of preparing the atmosphere. If the atmosphere emanates from us preparing the atmosphere for the schoolroom, if we have appreciated the work of the author first. And so there are several benefits that we get, I think, from this kind of preparation. The most obvious one is a kind of a sense of confidence and peace in the day-to-day. And so anytime that you prepare for anything, it usually goes a little bit more smoothly than it otherwise would. There's always, still stumbling blocks, and our aim isn't to clear every stumbling block that will happen, but to be in a good posture to overcome them. And I think that that's what this allows, is that we know what we're about, we have our role, we know the books, we feel a good sense of what the plan is, and so we can go to the day-to-day with a peace and a confidence. But then also, I think, and this is so important for us whenever we take up the work of preparation, that we get an intellectual life from this work as well. And it's very easy to look at our prep time and resent it, or to look at our prep time and think, oh, well, this is like the overwhelming thought that you had, Amy, earlier, of like, it's easy to get overwhelmed. But if we were approaching it with this idea that we have so much to learn, and this is an opportunity to do that, then it kind of just, for me, it's a mindset shift that enables me to see my work in a whole different way, that it's not just for my students, it's for me as well. And it makes it just easier to prioritize. And I think Mrs. Hart-Davis has a great quote about this that I want to share. We've talked about Mrs. Hart-Davis. She was a PNEU mom and a colleague of Mason's with 8 children. And one of her articles, Family Life, this is how she describes this chance that we have. Example is the great motive power in education, that it is not what you do so much as who you are which tells. And it must be admitted that by the side of the vast and rapid growth of the children, there must be progress and growth in the parents. We cannot afford to stand still. We must establish a higher education of parents. We must make an effort to widen our own knowledge and to increase our hold of the interests which make life really worth living, and especially to inform ourselves upon the great social questions which everyone is thinking about and for which so many are working. The young people themselves are our salvation. Their eager inquisitiveness, their perpetual questions, their enormous power of acquiring new ideas of all sorts. That is, if our eyes and ears are not closed, affords us a large scope. If we will get out of our armchairs and fetch down the books. So there is this sense that, like, our children keep us accountable, right? Like, the fact that we're in charge of their education has the potential to keep us accountable, to keep us growing, right? Like, there's this, Mason says, it's so sad to see the mother who's just never having living ideas of her own, right? And so the child affords us this opportunity that we're constantly in the way of living books, and we're constantly reading and taking up the posture of the student for their sake, but then also for ours. So I think if we think of this as a calling, it ends up being a great joy for us. Our preparation looks a little bit different. And that's what we're going to talk about now. And Amy, if you could start, I think the ways in which we structure our summer preparation depends partly on the ages of our children, how we normally spend our summer days, and how we fit preparation into that. And so each of us are going to walk through our personal approach to offer some different ideas of ways it could be done. So do you want to go ahead and start with that?
Yes, I'll jump in. For the way that I approach it is, I think that there's 3 different types of preparation that I do. So the first are the things that fall under the atmosphere and discipline or habits. And again, like, putting time and energy into this means that each day when we talk about the timetable can run so smoothly with the spontaneous lessons if I have thought through the organization of all the things. So, that a place for everything and everything in its place. Where and how will I organize the books so that when I've combined and different kids have to pull out the book when their time slot they're reading it, they know exactly where to put it back, that they have their personal bins and with their supplies, their personal supplies and notebooks, and so they don't have to depend on the other kids for the things that they might need, and that we don't have any of the group, we don't know who messed up all the notebooks, their notebook is right in their bin, that sort of a thing, because we want them to, a big part of their education is them learning how to be responsible for their things. So their maps and atlases, the sand tray, their picture study paintings, all of those things, putting in place the systems to organize them, as well as sitting down and really going through the supplies, everything from handicrafts to our water brushes, looking at where everyone's watercolor paint set, do they need new ones? That is one part of the preparation. And so when we are talking about, all of the books, that to not forget this category as well. And I do have a friend for she just keeps a notebook. And so for every book that she writes out, then whatever she thinks through all of the supplies and writes it all out again in that way and thinks it through and creates a little list for herself. And I thought that was a nice idea. So beyond the supplies and the things for school, then we have books. And so next I look at, what books do I want to read thoroughly? And I'll keep a commonplace, or at least mark where I want to record quotes. Sometimes I always keep Post-it notes with me so that if I want to write a comment to the kids in the book, I can. But these are books that tend to be a bit simpler, so I can read them thoroughly. And it's part of my own intellectual growth. I haven't read so many of these books myself, before coming to homeschooling. So the architecture, biography, historical fiction, the travelogues, the novels, and they are books that I can conquer at the end of the day, even if I'm tired or at the park, or if I keep always one going in my purse. So if I'm in a line or at the doctor's office, I have these books to work through, and I try to get through as many of them in the summer as possible. And then, but especially start with term 1 books so that I'm ready for term 1. From there, then there are the books that I think of as not just like I want to read thoroughly and enjoy for good conversations, but books to actually need some prep work on my part and some thought, and especially then when I approach them, I want to look again at the form guide, or if there was a subject guide for that, geography, for example, to go through that. And again, I keep my pad of Post-it notes so I can just pop them right into the book. And also then have my notebook for my where I do my plans. And for that, the way I like to approach it is I do it by subject. And this, again, is helping because of all of the combinations that we end up setting up, that I'll have a week to conquer Bible, and week 2 is citizenship and literature. Another week is for the common subjects, another week for history. So 2 weeks usually for history and 2 weeks for science. And with that, we have an hour of quiet time a day. And in the summer, really, it has been more like 2 hours in the afternoon that I have gotten to tackle that kind of preparatory work. And also I have had almost like a little mini summer planning retreat for myself, where it's been, now that we do the CVC retreat, it hasn't happened as much, but I used to take okay, I'm going to really work for this weekend and have an even more thorough time. But so that's also an idea that had worked when the kids were younger, and I had more little ones that it was harder to just have that afternoon time to take a block of time and ask for my husband's help so that he would watch the kids and I could have a whole Saturday and Sunday for that work. So what about you? I imagine you do something similar, but different approaches too.
Yeah, I think, a lot of things in terms of setting up the space and stuff, that I do a similar thing. But I was going to show with this CVC Summer Challenge, what I basically did, if you saw our last video on the combining, I sat down first and looked at how I was going to combine. So I had a master list of books that I was going to use this year. And then I did break down the books that I needed to read, or that I would like to prepare for the year, into the categories similar to what we had on the Summer Challenge worksheet. So I used my own categories, but based off those, which ones are going to be summer reading that is with notes, which ones I'm just going to treat as leisure reading and I just keep a commonplace book, which ones have guides and I'm going to sit down with the guide and think about that, and then which ones I'm going to reserve and really pre-read week by week. And I used to, in all prior years, I would do most of my reading week by week. But this year, with the ages of the students I have and starting high school, I really am trying to do a lot of more prep work than I normally do in the summertime. And so this little sheet has been a way to help me focus and really see what is my work that I'm hoping to accomplish this summer. And so I have them set up by form and in these categories, but then from there I've just been picking freely. So that's what I feel like for summertime. I just feel a sense of flexibility about it, and I just look at my list and I look at the shelf and I see what I want to grab next. And so that's been refreshing for me and for this year, and have been making progress in different places. And so I'll spend a week doing the history book and the Form 2 literature book, and so it's been a nice mix for me. Some of the books I'm keeping more careful notes, like I said, and I have a notebook, and in the front is where I have notes that I'm keeping for books that I feel need that kind of prep work, that I don't want to have to reread it during the year, but it's a dense book, and I know that I'll want to kind of revisit my notes. But then in the back, I'm just keeping my commonplace. So it's nice having it all in one notebook, and I feel like I've been carrying this notebook around all summer. And then the other thing that I was going to talk about is how I'm using the guides. So I think that each guide, it depends how I'm going to use it, depending on what subject it's for. I've been using it slightly different this summer. So for the special study guide, it would be something where I get out the guide, I get out the book that it's, the lessons are coming from, and I really look it over thoroughly before we begin and kind of get us read all the little sections. They're very short, and get a sense of how it would work for my family and kind of sketch out. I put little numbers next to the lessons of what order I think we might do it in, and then which ones are weather dependent. And so I feel like I have a good sense now of what that subject will look like, and I've placed I make sure that we have the few materials that we'll need and that's ready to go. But then each week I'll look and just grab the lesson that we'll do. So like my prep is done, but there will be the sense that I check in on a weekly basis. And then with the geography guide, where there's like these large chapter notes and really this beginning information about how to use the map and what are map questions, that's what I'm reading through and thinking through, that kind of thing I'm thinking through in the summertime, making sure that I understand what the process looks like. But then each week I will just look at those chapter notes. And so I don't feel the need to read those in advance. I'm just keeping one step ahead on those. So each guide has a little bit of a different approach, but it's been nice to sort of sit down and look through the books with guides and think about how to use them best. So I think we have different ways, a little bit of organizing our work, but I think that we're doing different, similar kinds of work, and that we have a similar focus. So we're preparing our spaces and to make sure that the students have what they need to learn well. And then we're preparing ourselves to be the guide, philosopher, and friend. And our goal is not to create daily lesson plans. Okay, so how would you state what our goal really is?
Yes. To be a guide, philosopher, and friend, right? We know we want to be prepared for our work and to be the kind of person that we hope our children become. And so that's like our lifelong goal. And so that could be like a weighty thing to try to consider. But in focusing on the book itself, what we're doing is considering ideas. That is what Mason says is the goal. We choose a living book because it will be filled with ideas rather than, and facts to support those ideas rather than just, the facts. And so and this is really then that relational approach that we want the children to need to have with the book so that they can actually assimilate the ideas. And so in volume 3, Mason writes, when we consider that the setting up of relations, moral and intellectual relationships, is our chief concern in life, and that the function of education is to put the child in the way of the relations proper to him, and to offer the inspiring idea which commonly initiates a relation. So we refer to this, Mason sometimes calls it to give an inspiring idea. She talks about captain ideas, central ideas. There's a few different terms she can sometimes put in there. Vitalizing ideas is another one. But this sense that, like when we go to, we have two friends that we love and they don't know each other and we're so excited for them to meet, we often want to set up an initial way of, Celeste, I'm so glad you're finally getting to meet Erin. I've always thought that, that sort of a thing. And so we want to be reading to see, are there things where we can initiate the relationship for the child to the book itself. In volume 3, just a bit further on, she says, our work is to give vitalizing ideas. In volume 2, she says, our part as the teacher is to see that his educational plate is constantly replenished with fit and inspiring ideas. So I think that even if we might not ever share the ideas we've gleaned, when we're reading the book, that's what we're reading it for. I'm not writing down the quotes and the dates or the names or any of those kinds of things. I'm saying, what are the inspiring ideas that I should have for myself and take in, and with the hope of making sure that I'm giving it a fit education. And that will really change, I think, the way that you see the books that we've chosen. If you compare two books side by side, which one has fit and inspiring ideas in it? And so, the child should be the one to dig for those ideas so often. But Mason says in the same section in volume 3, but it is up to us to give impulse and to order that knowledge. So that's what I'm looking for. And so that's why then the keeping a commonplace is such a fit thing to do, which is just simply having a notebook where we write down the meaningful quotes to us. I think if you do that process, you're finding the ideas in the book.
Right. Those are the things our mind naturally gravitates toward, because like when we're not trying to adopt the posture of the teacher and, like think about ourselves as creating plans, our mind naturally gravitates toward the ideas. And those are things we want to write down and remember and think about more. So if you're finding something you want to think about more, that's a good sense that it's an idea. Yeah. So we are not then taking a bunch of time and feeling like we need to create sort of careful weekly or daily breakdowns for every student for every subject during the summertime. And we know that the PNEU didn't give breakdowns for the books, that they offered the term program like we have. Why do we think that might be?
I think it's because Mason trusted mothers. And she knew that if we have a living child and a living book, right, and then this living method, that would be complicated, and it would be difficult to say all children across America, and really in her time, right, there were 80,000 children all over the world. I know all children on this day in the PNEU should do this amount of work. That it's absurd, right, of what they will need on a given day for a lot of different reasons. So instead of predetermining and creating, I mean, they were in existence for a long time and had people working through these books for decades, and they didn't ever want to. They would give a sample way that you could break it out, a lesson, or that in the schools that the teachers did it, and had homeschooling moms write in as a sample of one to learn from, but that wasn't their determination. And so instead, what came with every program of every term was the timetable, and that's what we're accountable to say, okay, to provide the proper nutrition of the mind, there's this amount of time that should be spent in the morning hours on science, and this amount on grammar in a week, and this amount in foreign language. And overall, that is the key set of time. And what you might be able to do in that time is up to you. You also have the afternoons to continue to pursue that knowledge. If a child then develops that relationship and affinity with it and wants to continue to read more and do those sorts of things in their occupational time, that is always fine. But we know that those basics are covered, and that's why our timetable talk will be such an important thing. And so to me, I feel like so many of us have had it backward for so long that we try to highly structure our books, even though we say they're living. And then we live in this really loose way and try to, in our kind of, busyness of life and the mood that we're in, take on, this highly structured thing. And then those two things butt heads all the time. And instead, what we hope to show in the timetable talk is to set forth a workable timetable that fits your particular family, and what Celeste's family with 10 children and 7 school-age kids is like compared to mine will be 2 different timetables. But what we both have is this general goal of the term, that when the curriculum writers, and so many of our books are Mason's books, or we chose a book that we think fits in the slot that she had so we can use her breakdown, that this is a good guide for us of how much reading we think could be accomplished. But you may do a third of a chapter, often because the beginning of a chapter is more dense and you're getting used to, they're introducing a lot of the ideas. And then when you go pick up that chapter the next week, you could read the full length of the chapter. And that way we see that's how we move through the books and more at a good pace. And so I hope that is a helpful idea, that we think that this provides flexibility. And so often mothers can start to feel discouraged, like, oh, I thought I was going to read this chapter, half a chapter every week, and I'm not doing that. And you think that that is the failure on your part. And maybe you can see, yes, it's like it is a habit. We're not starting on time, but it might not be in the actual lesson that that's the problem. It could be that you were not seeing the proper pacing for your child in approaching the book as a whole. So we hope that mothers can then have, again, like so much we talk about, like we want the mothers to feel empowered in the moment to choose the stopping point that makes sense. And then it's then key, if you approach it this way, that you need a logbook. And so we'll talk about that in our next chat of how do we then record the work and know what to do next. And that can seem like, it sounds like, oh, this is very loosey-goosey. And, you know, if anybody who thinks like, oh, that's Celeste and Amy are like loosey-goosey and it does not make sense. They just pick up the book and read. No, but there's this freedom to be in the moment of learning, and then to have the tool of the logbook to keep us on track. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Well, I was just going to say that I think that there's times at which I will sort of